Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for our presentation on Sweet Talk. We are going to talk about the truth about sugar and other sweeteners. And just to introduce myself, my name is Courtney Weiss, and like Brooke said, I am a senior in the Coordinated Dietetics program.
My name is Adeline White, and I'm also a senior in the program.
And my name is Katie Thompson. So as they said, we're all seniors and we're looking forward to graduating, but we're excited to be with you guys today. We wanted to start out with just kind of an icebreaker question. So this presentation is going to be very interactive, and we would love for you guys to just kind of feel free to jump in, and we'll ask a lot of questions. And we would love for your input, because that's what makes it great, right? Is when we have a lot of people and discussion going. And so we wanted to start with an icebreaker question. So what is your guys' favorite sweet food? So maybe we'll just kind of go, like, just kind of unmute yourself and introduce your name, and then just kind of what your favorite sweet food is. So I'm Katie, right? And my favorite sweet food is ice cream.
I'll just pop in next. My favorite sweet food is also ice cream.
I'll just pop in next. I like candies like Skittles and stuff. And I also like cupcakes and like cake batter, stuff like that.
Thanks, Tony. Anyone else? Was that Tony?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
I'm Katie, and I just had a really yummy M&M cookie, so that's currently my favorite.
I'll hop in next. I love cheesecake.
Anyone else have a favorite sweet food? Oh, we have a comment. I love donuts, ice cream, and warm cookies. Me too.
Awesome. Okay, if no one else says, I'll share mine. Right now, I really like, I don't know if you consider this a sweet food, but it is. A raspberry jam. It's like one of my things right now. Like, I love raspberry jam mostly with peanut butter, but. Okay.
Okay, so welcome to the Hive. So for our presentation today, obviously we're going to be talking about sugar and sweeteners and how they work in our bodies. And we're kind of going to compare it to a beehive and how some of the different bees in a beehive work together to benefit the queen bee. So we'll go through and explain the roles of these different bees and also the roles that different sugars and sweeteners play in our body.
Okay, so first we are going to start with the queen. So in our presentation today, the queen is going to represent us. If we think about the queen is kind of the one who is in charge of the hive, right? And so we'll be relating kind of the other bees to more of like the sugars, but the queen will be us. And we'll be talking a little bit more about how to make your food work for you. So kind of like we talked about, the queen's the leader, but why does the queen need the other bees? So when we look at the other bees, kind of like without them, there wouldn't be a hive, right? So we have the worker bees who go out and collect pollen, the drones who help fertilize the eggs. All of those things are all important in order to make the hive. So if the queen is our body, and then like the worker bees and the drones, the other bees represent kind of the food and sugars that we eat. And so similarly, our bodies need kind of those other bees, those other sugars and carbs and things that we'll be talking about today in order to function properly. So that's just kind of the analogy, and Adeline will talk about carbs next.
Okay, so carbs. So going along with our bee analogy, like Katie said, the queen bee being if the queen bee is our body, the queen bee, you know, she has specific functions that she needs to do, and she needs those other worker bees to help her. Our bodies, our specific function in our body is like to produce energy, right? What like Katie was saying. How many of you have heard, and you can like use the raise your hand function or like even comment if you want, have heard like controversial things about carbohydrates? I know a lot of like, I know right now carbohydrates are in the hot seat, and sometimes we hear we don't know how many carbs to eat, or if you should eat carbs, or how, if we do eat carbs, like what kind of carbs and stuff. So I just wanted to point out here that carbs are actually our body's main source of fuel. They're our body's preferred source of fuel. And I think that sometimes that gets overlooked. So in order for our bodies to produce energy, we actually do need to use those carbs, and it's our body's favorite source of fuel. Okay, here's a fun fact question, if anyone knows this. What organ uses the most carbs? Does anyone know? Special brownie points if anyone has a guess.
Tony's guessing the brain. Julie says the heart.
Oh, I should look in the chat. Sorry, I haven't been looking in it.
It's okay.
Okay, the brain and the heart, those are good guesses. So Tony, you're right. The brain is actually uses 20% of the fuel, like the carbs. It's the number one user of carbs that we eat, and the brain really prefers carbs for fuel. So good guess, good job. Okay, this is just a little bit background about carbs. Maybe you've learned this in some nutrition classes, but there are 3 different types of carbs. They're categorized into 3 different categories. The first category is starches. So you might have heard this. What are some foods that, when you think of starches, what are some foods that come to mind? Think of, yeah, that's great. Potatoes. Julie thinks potatoes, corn. Yeah, white bread. Awesome. Yeah, so I put down rice, bread, beans, but corn, potatoes, those are also examples of starches. Cool. What about fiber? Pasta. Good. Pasta would be a starch too. Yeah. Fiber is another category in our carb category. What do you think of when you think of fiber? Beans. Yeah, beans can be in both categories, fruits and vegetables. Yeah, fiber is anything that comes from a plant and our bodies can't quite digest all the way, but they still have really important functions in our bodies. I'll just put up vegetables, whole grains, any plant foods. The third category of carbs is sugar. And we can go into a lot about like starches and fiber and carbs, but today we're just going to focus on sugar. But that's just kind of like an overview of where we're coming from.
Okay, so like Adeline mentioned, our body needs carbs, they're essential, and sugar is part of that group. So what is the recommendation for sugar, and how do we know how much we're getting in our diet? I'm sure all of you have seen a nutrition facts label before. And if you notice kind of in the middle bottom section, that's where it tells us how much sugar is in the specific product. And there's 2 things that we want to look at. We want to notice the total amount of sugar, and we also want to notice the added sugar. So first, total sugar. This includes any sugar that naturally occurred in the product or any sugar that was added. And there's actually not a specific recommendation for total sugar in our diet. There's more just a recommendation for added sugar and how much added sugar we should have. So when it comes to added sugar, anything that has been packaged as like a sweetener counts as an added sugar. So if you add honey to a product or table sugar or even like concentrated fruit or vegetable juices, that all counts towards added sugar because it's added to the product. And then next to the added sugar, you'll see that there's a little percent, and this is the percent daily value, and it's based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. So the recommendation based off of a 2,000 calorie diet is that we keep our added sugars at 10% of those calories or below. So that would be like 200 calories of added sugar or about 50 grams. So for example, in this product, we see that 46% of the added sugar in this product, or 46% of the added sugar you should consume for the day is in one serving of this product. So if we know that based on a 2,000 calorie diet, about 50 grams is kind of that limit, and we're already at 23, we can assume that this product in particular kind of has a little bit more added sugar. And a good just kind of rule of thumb or reference to know if it's a lot or a little bit, 5% of a daily value is considered a lower amount of added sugar, and 20% of the daily value is considered a high amount of sugar. So can anybody think off the top of their head, like what sort of food products that we might consume daily or frequently have kind of around that 50 gram range of sugar per serving? Soda. Yeah, that was the first one that I thought of. I just looked up like a normal 12-ounce can of soda has, I think, 39 grams of sugar, which is a ton. Once I saw like a kind of a larger can energy drink and it had 70 grams of sugar. That's a lot to get in one serving. So something just to kind of be aware of, because we can really reach that 10% and beyond a lot faster than we may think. So the nutrition facts label is just a tool that we can use, and we can kind of reference, okay, how much sugar is in this product, how much added sugar. So just something to consider for the future.
All right, so now that we've learned kind of the basics of kind of carbs, how they work and how that affects the queen bee, so it affects our bodies. Next, we'll be talking about sugars that occur in whole foods, and we'll be relating that back to the worker bees. Does anyone know what the worker bee does in the colony? We don't know how much you know about bees, so does anyone know? Okay, so the worker bees are the ones who are kind of in charge of going out and collecting the pollen, and they come back and there's a lot of them. And so kind of like I guess when we relate it back to food and back to ourselves, where there's a lot of worker bees, we kind of want more of our sugars to be coming from whole foods versus added sugars, which we'll be talking about later. So we'll be relating it back to kind of the worker bees and then the sugars that come in whole foods.
Okay, whole foods that have sugar in them. I'm gonna let you guys, like, what whole foods can you think of that do have sugar in them? And by whole food, I mean like a food that has sugar in it naturally, right? We're not adding sugar to it. Okay, honey. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, great. Speaking of bees. Anything else you can think of? Fruits. Yes, fruit. And dairy. Okay, great. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to think about when we think about sugar, we often think about like the soda and the cookies and whatnot. But it's important to note that, hey, milk, dairy also has natural sugar in it. We'll go into what type of sugar that is in a minute. But so this includes like cheese, yogurt, cottage cheese. Those all have natural sugars in them. Fruit also has natural sugar in them. And then there's some natural sugars in some vegetables and like some grains as well. And this is different than carbs, right? Carbs was a different or this is different than like starches. Starches was a different category. So grains have starches, but they also have some specific sugars. So I'll explain that here. So This slide goes into a little more detail and a little more depth about how sugar is broken down, but I think it's helpful to understand. So sugar is broken down again into either what we call a monosaccharide or a disaccharide. And monosaccharides are just 1 sugar unit, but disaccharides are 2 sugar units, okay? So maybe you've heard of lactose. This is a disaccharide, or sucrose or fructose. And this is just helpful to understand because it helps us understand how our body metabolizes sugars. So when we eat a disaccharide, which is 2 sugar units, our body needs to break it down into a monosaccharide and break those units apart. And so that's helpful to just kind of know that overall, when we're eating sugar, our body eventually will break that down into simple sugar units. So a lot of the times these sugars are processed in similar ways. So for example, lactose or milk is a disaccharide. When we eat lactose or we eat milk, it's broken down into glucose and galactose. Fructose is the sugar mostly in fruit, and that's already a monosaccharide, so our body doesn't need to break it down. And then sucrose is the sugar that's found in some vegetables, and maltose is found in some grains. Those also get broken down into specific monosaccharides. Maltose gets broken down into actual glucose, and sucrose, glucose, and fructose. So I know that's like kind of in depth and a little bit scientific, but it's helpful to understand what our body is doing with these sugars and the differences between, like, per se, the sugar in milk and then the sugar in fruit. Does anyone have any questions about this? I know it's like, okay.
Okay, so we know that there's a lot of whole foods that are good sources of, or I guess just sources of sugar. What benefits do you guys think can come from eating some of these naturally occurring sugars in these foods? You can write it in the chat. Oh, fiber content. Definitely. That is a big one. Any other benefits you can think of? Energy. Mm-hmm. Yep, so the sugar is definitely going to give us some of that energy. Vitamins and minerals. Nice. There's one more that I'm thinking of, if anybody can think of it. If not, we can just hop on to the next slide. Okay, yeah, so you guys hit it spot on. We're getting some extra nutrition from having some of these whole foods that contain sugar. So one thing mentioned was fiber content, especially fruits and vegetables, even potatoes, they're gonna have lots of fiber, and fiber is gonna help kind of slow that absorption rate of the sugar, which is gonna keep our blood sugars a little bit more balanced and just help us feel better and keep our energy levels stable. The other one nobody mentioned was protein. And this one is mostly found in dairy. So milk and yogurt is also going to have protein along with carbohydrates and sugar. And again, protein is going to help slow that absorption of sugar, just to keep, again, our blood sugars balanced and stable energy. And then you also mentioned vitamins and minerals. And then there's water content too, especially like in fruits and vegetables. So it's kind of like a triple whammy. When we choose to eat these foods, not only are we getting energy from the sugar, but we might also be getting fiber and protein, extra vitamins and minerals and hydration. And all of those things in combination help to slow the digestion of that sugar. So it just keeps us feeling a little bit better. So we don't, get that sugar high and then crash like we might if we just had, a can of soda on an empty stomach or something like this. So I guess the take-home message for sugar found in whole foods is, yeah, even though milk has sugar in it and fruit does have sugar, sometimes people can get scared of that because there's sometimes just like that fear element with, oh, am I eating too much sugar? But we really shouldn't be scared of the sugar that comes from these whole foods, excuse me, because of all this extra nutrition that we get.
Okay, so how do we know if something has natural sugars versus added sugars? So Courtney has kind of talked about the nutrition label and sort of where to look. But what do you guys notice about this label if you look at total sugars and added sugars? Just go ahead and put it in the chat what you notice. Or you can talk to if you'd rather. There's only naturally occurring sugars, no added sugars. Great. So we can see here, when we look at the nutrition label, those total sugars is going to take the natural sugars plus the added sugars, and it's going to list it there. And then they'll go into further detail and say how many added sugars are in the content. So we can see this is 100 or 1% cow's milk. And like when you just buy milk from the store, right, in the milk jug, there's not any added sugars to that. However, we could see that there are 12 grams of those naturally occurring sugars, kind of like Adeline had mentioned, the lactose and those other components that naturally occur in milk, you can find on the label. Now, obviously, like some foods like fruits and vegetables are not going to have a nutrition label. However, you could infer, right, that there's probably some in there. But if you're wondering about maybe like certain foods, like how much natural sugars versus added sugars, you can look at that label as well. So just to kind of reiterate what Courtney had mentioned earlier, there's a place labeled for that that you can be aware of as you eat your foods. So, all right, so we wanted to do a review question. You guys had already kind of hit it on the head earlier, but how do the worker bees benefit the queen? So if we remember in our analogy, the queen is our bodies, right? And the worker bees are the sugars that come from whole foods. So why is it beneficial for us to eat sugar that comes in whole food form? What benefits come from that?
It's not a trick question. We like kind of already talked about it. But if there's any other benefits anyone wanted to add.
Okay, so like we said, just to review, we get more protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and energy. Awesome. So we also are getting kind of that slower digestion. We're getting kind of a not so high of a blood sugar spike like we had talked about. And yes, those are the benefits of eating sugar in whole food form.
Awesome. So next, we're going to talk about drone bees. So we talked about worker bees, and these are like real bees in the beehive. I don't know if anyone's been interested in bees before, but they're really fascinating. So drone bees, I guess I'll ask first if there's any beekeepers out there. Does anyone know what the drone bee's role in the beehive is? Yeah. Okay. Nope. Okay. So the drone bees are the only male bees in the beehive, and they actually fertilize the queen so that the queen can lay eggs for the next 3 to 5 years, which is really interesting. The drone bees, there's a lot less of them, and they tend to leave the beehive after they've done their job. We're going to compare the drone bees to added sugars. So we already talked about like sugars coming from whole foods. So now we're going to talk about added sugars a little more in depth. The reason we're going to compare drone bees to added sugars is because while added sugars do have their purpose, there's a lot less of them needed for our bodies or in our beehive. So.
Okay, so we're going to play a little game and just kind of test your knowledge to see if you know what qualifies as an added sugar. So we'll just go through each of these, and you can put in the chat or just shout out true or false, and then we'll talk about them. So 100% maple syrup, is that an added sugar?
True or false? We got a
True.
true.
Okay, do you want to click the next slide, Alan? False. This one is actually false. So 100% maple syrup, you can kind of think of it as like maple syrup is in the bottle. It's naturally occurring. And so that is actually false. It wouldn't be an added sugar. However, it could be true, the second you use that maple syrup and add it to your pancakes, or if you add it to some banana bread that you're making, then it does become an added sugar because you're adding it to a recipe or something like that. So that one was a little bit tricky. What about table sugar or sucrose? True, yes. Yep, definitely true, because table sugar, you're gonna be adding it to recipes, and it's not sugar that naturally occurred in a product like milk or fruit, so it would be an added sugar. What about honey in a smoothie? True. Yep. Again, because we're going to be adding that honey to the smoothie, so then it becomes added sugar in the smoothie. Okay, sugar and chocolate milk. True. Yes, that is right. Because so milk itself does have lactose in it, like Adeline talked about, which is naturally occurring sugar. So if we're just talking about the sugar in milk itself, it would be false. However, when we make chocolate milk, we're going to be adding some extra sugar into it to give it that chocolate flavor, which then gives it some added sugar. High fructose corn syrup. True, definitely. Yep. That is in a lot of like granola bars and just packaged products we see. What about vegetable juice in fruit snacks? That one's true as well. Yep, again, even if it's a fruit juice or vegetable juice concentrate, you're then adding that to a fruit snack product and it makes it added sugar. What about the fructose in a peach? False. Right, because we learned fructose is the naturally occurring sugar in a peach. Yep. And then last one, so the light syrup that's in canned peaches. This one is going to be true. Yep, because it's added to the product. Awesome, you guys did good. You got them all right.
Yeah, I'm impressed.
You're so smart. You've been listening good too. So, all right. So now we kind of just wanted to see what your input was on like what sweeteners are healthy or unhealthy. So we have a few here. What would you guys consider the healthy sweeteners? Honey. Okay. Raw honey. Great. What about the unhealthy sweeteners? What ones kind of get a bad rep? Caro syrup, that high fructose corn syrup, right? Same with just the regular sugar, right? So often in kind of those healthified recipes, people will substitute regular table sugar or high fructose corn syrup for something else. And common substitutions include that 100% pure maple syrup or the coconut sugar or the raw honey. Even agave syrup is also commonly substituted. However, Adam will talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but it's kind of, there are maybe some benefits, but really kind of sugar is sugar. So Adeline will go into further details on that.
Yeah, that was kind of a quick trick question because healthy and unhealthy sugar is like Katie said, sugar is sugar, right? But there are like some different benefits that it's just good to know about. So I'm just going to briefly go over some popular like things that you might see in recipes. Like how many of you have seen recipes that are like, I don't know, healthy brownies, whatever, and then they have like coconut sugar instead of regular sugar, right? And that's kind of like the only replacement, which is kind of funny. But so this is just to help you when you see those recipes or see things like that to kind of know, okay, what actually is going on, what are the benefits and what aren't. So 100% maple syrup. I've seen these in recipes, adding maple syrup to things instead of sugar. So there are some minerals in maple syrup. There's going to be more than there is in sugar, and other like slight benefits, but you'll have to eat a lot of maple syrup for those minerals to be substantial. Same with coconut sugar. There's more nutrients in coconut sugar, but you have to eat a lot of it. So those are the kind of things with maple syrup and coconut sugar. Actually, same with honey. Honey is slightly anti-inflammatory. It has some really good antioxidants in it and such, but you'd have to eat a lot of it to get those effects. So that's just something to think about when you're like, if coconut sugar, if you like the taste of coconut sugar and the taste of table sugar, and it's not going to ruin your cookies if you use coconut sugar instead, right? Then maybe it's worth it to have those little health benefits or little extra nutrients. But if you're using coconut sugar and it's kind of ruining your cookies, then I would say it's not worth it, because the nutrients you're getting from the coconut sugar is so minuscule that really it's just going to act like sugar in your body either way. So that's just something to think about. With honey, I did look into a specific study that took people who were eating honey and then took people who were eating high fructose corn syrup, and both of them had the same effect on the body. So it just kind of showed that honey didn't really make that big of a difference on the body and blood sugar levels. Monk fruit extract, I put this in here because I feel like there's a hype around monk fruit right now. So just to know, monk fruit extract actually doesn't have any calories, and it's considered a non-nutritive sweetener. So that kind of, I put that in because there's a hype around it, but Courtney's going to talk more about non-nutritive sweeteners later and pros and cons of that. And then applesauce or dates. How many of you seen like applesauce or dates used in recipes? This applesauce and dates, they're fruit, right? So they may add more fiber and more like antioxidants and vitamins and minerals than maybe like your honey or maple syrup or coconut sugar. So those are things to consider, but just here, I'll go to the next slide. Just kind of bottom line, I put, while there's small differences from bee to bee, most drone bees play the same role in the end. Or in other words, if the differences of like coconut sugar and maple syrup, there's small differences between those and regular table sugar. And if the taste doesn't bug you and the cost doesn't bug you, then maybe it's worth it to use those instead. But in the end, your body's going to digest it like sugar, and it'll kind of have the same effect on your body.
Awesome. Okay, so the next bees we're going to talk about are the Wannabes. Has anybody heard of Wannabes before? You might not have, because they actually don't exist. I mean, in terms of like an actual beehive and, you know, the drone bees and the worker bees, we just made this one up because it sounds kind of cute. But if you think about the term a wannabe, what is a wannabe? It's somebody that's trying to be something else, right? And so that's a way that we can think about these non-nutritive sweeteners, because they're trying to be like natural sugar or added sweeteners, because they're giving us that sweet sensation in our bodies. However, they actually don't provide any calories or energy for us. So that's why they're wannabes.
Okay, so what are these non-nutritive sweeteners? So kind of as a general rule, like Courtney had said, they are considered very like no calorie or low calorie sweeteners. And that is because they're typically so sweet, so potent that they are, they're so potent that they are like however many times, 200 to 600 times sweeter than sugar. So they only need to use just a tiny bit in there, like a few drops, in order to get that similar sweetness factor that you would get from regular table sugar. So as a general rule, the FDA considers these generally recognized as safe. There is still a lot of ongoing research, though, that kind of is maybe looking further into how these affect our body, if they do, and at what amounts. And so that is just something to consider, that like, even though research is still going, the FDA has approved them as safe. So as recognized as safe. So let's go over kind of these non-nutritive sweeteners. So aspartame is probably one of the most common ones and also gets a really bad rep, I feel like. So aspartame is 160 to 220 times sweeter than table sugar. And so common brands of that are NutraSweet, Equal. It's often found in kind of those sodas, yogurts, it's found in a lot of places. Saccharin is 300 times sweeter, and its brand name is Sweet and Low. So if people like to add that Sweet and Low to their coffee, that is called saccharin. Acetylsulfame potassium is often found in things like protein powders, and often I think it's kind of being substituted for aspartame in those sodas more so now, in the diet sodas. And so it's 200 times sweeter than table sugar. And its brands are Sunnit and Sweet One. And then sucralose is the most sweet among these that we've shown. It is 600 times sweeter. So a brand name for that is Splenda, which I'm sure you guys have heard of. And then stevia or stevia is 250 times sweeter than sugar. And common brands are Truvia and Sweet Leaf. And then erythritol is considered a sugar alcohol. So sugar alcohols are kind of, they look like a sugar molecule, but they have an alcohol attached to them, in like when we're talking about the chemical structure. And so our body kind of perceives them similar to a sugar molecule, if that makes sense. However, other sugar alcohols, you can kind of tell what they are by the last two letters, so that OL. So other sugar alcohols are something like xylitol or sorbitol. Those are also in kind of that family. And then I'd put erythritol on here. And it's 60 to 80%. Is that what's in gum? It's commonly in gum. Yeah. And it actually, some of them have benefits to like your teeth, they're not going to detriment your teeth like sugar might. So there is a little bit of benefit there. However, when sugar alcohols are consumed in high amounts, they are most commonly associated with kind of stomach upset or digestive problems. So if maybe your treat or something is sweetened with erythritol, you may not want to go overboard. It may cause things like diarrhea if you eat too much of it. And the brand name for erythritol is Nectress. However, like I said, there's multiple kind of those sugar alcohols in kind of, you just want to look for that OL at the end, and that's kind of how you know. So.
So what have you guys heard about non-nutritive sweeteners? I think aspartame is talked about quite probably the most of all those from what I've seen, but what have you heard about the pros and cons of non-nutritive sweeteners? If anything, yeah, 0 calories is a huge pro. Yeah, great. I'm glad you brought that up. What else? That's why a lot of people will use, like it's in diet soda, right? That's why a lot of people will drink diet soda, because 0 calories, 0 sugar. Yeah. You've heard Alzheimer's disease, Kay? Yeah, great.
I don't know if that's actually true, but I've just heard that.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen Alzheimer's disease, but I believe you. Like, I believe that there's stuff about that out there about non-nutritive sweeteners. Yeah, I'll kind of put up, there was some stuff ago that came about aspartame linked to cancer. Yeah, I've heard a lot about like there's cancer risks and stuff. So like Tony mentioned, there's 0 calories, which is a huge pro and why to use a non-nutritive sweetener. For diabetics or just anyone in general, it has less effect on the blood sugar. Helps things. So maybe you don't like diet soda, maybe that doesn't taste better for you, but some things like helps improve the taste without adding sugar to it, right? I'm thinking specifically of like the yogurt I eat. It tastes a lot better. There's non-nutritive sweeteners in it, but not sugar. It tastes a lot better than plain yogurt. So those are some things that I just thought of that are beneficial for non-nutritive sweeteners. All the cons have question marks behind them because they're still being studied. So like Katie said, the FDA recognizes non-nutritive sweeteners as safe right now. But there's still like studies that say, oh, it may increase cancer risk. It may increase your sugar cravings. It may still spike your insulin. It may change your gut microbiome. It may give you a false sense of satiety. So eating like drinking like a diet soda where it has 0 calories, you think you're satisfied, you think you gave yourself fuel, but then later you're extra hungry because you actually didn't give yourself fuel at that time. You just suppressed your hunger, right? So that could be something to think about. With these studies that were done, most of them were done with large amounts of the non-nutritive sweetener that cause cancer, right? Amounts in which we wouldn't eat in a day. So that's why I kind of put question marks behind them, because I don't want them to be scary, but just something that to consider in the back of your mind, that maybe to eat non-nutritive sweeteners in moderation, just like any other food.
Yeah, so with non-nutritive sweeteners or artificial sweeteners, there are a lot of pros and cons, like you guys mentioned and Adeline talked about. So with those, it really just comes down to personal choice, but we thought to mention some things you might consider when deciding, okay, is this something that you are going to decide to have in your diet? So again, just remember that the research is limited. So yeah, there might be some fear out there about, oh my gosh, it's going to give me Alzheimer's disease or cancer or totally mess with my gut microbiome. But know that research has mostly been focused on mice. Studies haven't been really long-term and no strong conclusions have been drawn. So at this point, they're generally recognized as safe. However, it's important, like Adeline said, to just monitor your intake. It's probably not something you want to go overboard on, but just kind of keep your intake moderate. And then also, whoops, I think we skipped ahead, but just talking about like consuming, oh yeah, so Adeline mentioned like that false sense of satiety. So you might want to consider consuming, like if you're going to have a Diet Coke with artificial sweeteners that's 0 calories, maybe you consume it with some food as well. So you actually are giving your body the energy that it needs. But then you're also getting to enjoy your soda that gives you that sweet sensation. And then probably the last consideration is just to pay attention to you and your own body. Like Katie had mentioned with sugar alcohols, sometimes they can be linked to a lot of GI discomfort and bloating and gas. And so pay attention to you. If you eat a product with artificial sweeteners and you notice, oh, I don't really feel good. This, gives me a headache or, GI discomfort, then know that maybe your body doesn't work super well with that particular sweetener. So that kind of goes back to a little bit of personalized nutrition. Find what works for you. And then I also just wanted to point out to the right, you can see some of the recommendations for the acceptable daily intake. So the amount that we can consume without it being a concern. For a 132 pound person, they would need to consume 23 packets of sucralose or 45 packets of saccharin or 75 packets of aspartame sweetener to even get close to that level that would be considered too much or unsafe. So it's likely that you're not going to be getting that if you have, 1 or 2 Diet Cokes or sources of artificial sweetener a day. So just something to consider when you're deciding to make your choice.
Okay, so this is kind of in conclusion, we like to make sure that those who are considering kind of improving their diet to focus on what they can add. So we've talked about a lot of things today. We talked about sugars in whole foods. We talked about added sugars as well as artificial sweeteners. So what can you add to your diet? That doesn't necessarily mean we want to add lots of sugar, right? Most of us are getting enough sugar. However, we would rather a nutrition by addition mindset than nutrition by elimination mindset. And so maybe if you really love that Snickers bar at 2 p.m., maybe we have some nuts to go with it or a string cheese to go with it. Something that has a little bit more protein to kind of balance that out, right? Or fruit or vegetables or something like that. Or maybe you want to incorporate more sugars that naturally occur in food. So maybe instead of eating 1 fruit a day, you want to eat 3 servings of fruit a day. That's great. Or maybe instead of just drinking your Diet Coke on an empty stomach or sipping it throughout the day, maybe you sit down and eat it with a meal, kind of like we had talked about as well. So we really just want to encourage you to focus on maybe what could you add versus subtract from our diet in order to improve our health. And so what we want you to do is we'll just give you guys like a minute to write down a small goal or a reflection from what you learned today. We don't have to share it. It's just kind of for you to just reflect on maybe what you've learned and what you would like to improve. And so we'll give you guys a minute to do that. Okay, perfect. So we just wanted to thank you guys for coming, and now we would like to open it up for questions. What questions do you guys have about the things we talked about today or other related topics?
We have a second for anyone else, I guess. But thank you for joining today, guys. And I guess if no one has any questions, then that's it. I'll put our references slide up.
Thanks for coming, everyone.